These commitments lead you down the pathway to solve almost any problem your marriage faces and to prevent new ones from occurring. With biblical insights and engaging personal stories, Kevin shows you how to see your marriage as bigger than yourself. Avoid both apathy and aggression. Release the desire for power. Make and maintain peace and endure difficult times, and much more. Kevin has a master's in divinity from Beeson Divinity School and is the lead pastor at Community Bible Church, a growing multi-site church with 4 locations in western Arkansas. Every year he meets with nearly 100 couples with a range of needs from premarital counseling to navigate the most serious betrayals. His previous book, Friends, Partners, and Lovers, was the #1 new release in Christian marriage. A marriage and parenting conference speaker, he and his wife Jenny have 2 children and live in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He blogs at kevinathompson.com. Here to share his new book, Happily, 8 Commitments of Couples Who Laugh, Love, and Last, is our good friend, Kevin Thompson. Kevin, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, it was great to have you with the release of your best-selling new release in Christian Marriage, Friends, Partners, and Lovers. And this is kind of the sequel to that book. And, you know, the idea that we come into marriage with so many preconceived notions. There seemed to be just this long list of expectations that, I don't know the word, bred that way. We have this imagination. We have this pie in the sky kind of view that everything's going to be perfect. When you take 2 people from 2 diverse backgrounds, and unless they're really high school sweethearts and they grew up in the same city, the same community, same influences, knew each other's families very, very well, statistically it doesn't look good for marriage overall, but you have found that there are some principles to put in play that you've actually applied in your own marriage, that you and Jenny have used to navigate both your first book, which was about how you became friends, how you became partners, and how that led to a deep, loving, and abiding relationship. Now you've moved it towards this understanding of what you had to do to get there. This is kind of your personal, you know, I don't think people realize that when we preach and when we teach and when we write books, we're actually writing them to ourselves first.
Oh, there's no question about it, and that's what it was for me. I never dreamed I would get into the marriage kind of field or even discuss it in any way. I started a blog in 2013, and just kind of the excess of what was left over from sermons. I thought there was some good material, some application points that maybe wasn't appropriate for a Sunday morning, but still made perfectly good sense. I got in the discipline in writing, and one day I just wrote a marriage blog. My wife and I at the time had been married about 13, 14 years. And so I wrote the article. I didn't think it was very special, didn't think it was very much to it, and there was a tremendous response to it. And so I understood that there was a niche there in which people were longing for good marriage advice that could just be practically applied to their own relationships. And so I began the process of writing every Wednesday on this idea of marriage, and it's from that my first book, Friends, Partners, and Lovers, did come from. Marriage doesn't really come with a job description. They don't say, here's exactly what you're supposed to do. So instead, everybody forms their own opinions, maybe from their family of origin, maybe from television, from Hollywood, from popular culture. Whatever their expectation is, they come in with a self-created job description that is very rarely accurate. And so we went back into the original creation story with Friends, Partners, and Lovers and said, what is it that a spouse is supposed to do? And we just saw these 3 unique attributes, that a spouse is supposed to be a friend, a partner, and a lover. A friend is somebody who's always on your side, by your side. A partner is someone who always has your back. And a lover is someone who always sees you and loves you anyway, and loves you in the midst of that. And so to me, Friends, Partners, and Lovers really answer the question, what makes a marriage work? But I always knew there was more to the story. Just knowing what to do is never enough. We also have to know how to do it. What's the attitude? What's the mindset in which we're going to go about that? And to me, Happily is the natural sequel to Friends, Partners, and Lovers. FPL shows us what to do. Happily is going to show us how to do it.
In your introduction, you did something really quite stunning, and you put in there a section on the modern rules for marriage, that they come in with these expectations, and I think that this kind of sets the foundation for how you break these, and they are strongholds. They are expectations that we hold dearly to, that if they're not met, we consider them to be deal breakers. As I look at the list, and maybe we can talk about some of these, we believe that there is someone just for us, and that if you find them, you're going to have a great relationship, and everything's going to fit neatly together by design, by divine design, that God picked that one for you, and it's just going to work because He says so. And the natural instinct is that, well, if it's not working, then this must not be the right one for me.
Yeah, and in the introduction, I do list out these 8 or 9 modern rules for marriage, but they basically come down to one basic concept, which is marriage isn't going to demand anything of me or from me. It's simply going to give to me. And so marriage suddenly becomes about me, about my happiness, about my satisfaction. There's no need for me to change. If I find the right person, marry the right person, everything will be easy. They will agree with me. We'll have this long-lasting love affair. But we know the Christian story says that our hearts are in desperate need of transformation. And God is in the process of changing us into His likeness. And He's the one that created marriage. And so, in part, marriage is an avenue by which He's going to transform my heart, which means immediately I should have the expectation that marriage is going to reveal in me and from me a sinfulness, a brokenness, things that need to be changed. I'm going to need to work. I'm going to need to learn. I'm going to need to understand. And so the modern perception and conception about what marriage is all about leads us down a path of destruction, because we're not going to work. We're going to be surprised when things go wrong, and we're just going to assume that we married the wrong person, or that something is broken within us. Or how often do I hear, where are all the good men today? Or what's wrong with women today? As if the entire problem is the other gender. And then some people just throw up their hands and they think the institution of marriage is outdated and it no longer works. When in reality, the problem is that we have basically chosen the wrong path to try to accomplish and get to the destination that we desire. In my opinion, happily, these 8 commitments that aren't mine, they're from the words of Jesus, they show us the path. It's almost as though we've taken our Google Maps and we've set in the wrong destination. And now we're trying to follow these modern rules turn by turn, never realizing that from the very get-go, the destination that we set out for was not really where we wanted to go. We headed the wrong direction. And so I think happily begins to set forth what is the right route to get to the end that we're really looking for.
When you diagnose the singularity of the problem, the words I, me, my, self, what I want, what I expect, what I demand, what I'm looking for, you and I have heard this way more than we probably even want to admit, that the same letter that's in the middle of sin is the same letter that's in the middle of pride, and that's I. Is this an I problem? Is this a problem of humility? Is it a problem of pride? Is it a problem of my needs being, that's enough about me, what about me?
No, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's a concept of self-indulgence, of just a total selfishness in every way, which is in part why the very first commitment comes from these words, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who understand their own need, who recognize their own need, and then almost come as a spiritual beggar to God and say, rid me of myself, teach me what it is that I need to do. And so the very first commitment really is a concept of humility. As we humble ourselves and recognize our own imperfection, recognize our own need, recognize the imperfection and need of the person that we're choosing to marry, we then turn our attention to God and say, okay, God, you show us how to do this properly. Left to our own devices, we won't be able to do it. Left to the advice of movies, of television, of books, of Facebook, of social media, left to just our own experiences from our parents. Many of us come from broken homes. And so what chance do we possibly have of creating this long-lasting, meaningful relationship left to our own? We don't. And so we desperately need God to intervene. And for me, God is the one that created marriage ultimately. In the very beginning, I mean, we could say there's a couple institutions that God created, and marriage is going to be one of the very first. And so it only makes sense that since he created it, he understands how it should operate. And so I turn to these words of Jesus in the Beatitudes, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, in which he's laying out the ethic of God's kingdom. It just made sense to me that if the Beatitudes kind of lay out the ethic of God's kingdom, and God is the one that created marriage, and marriage is in part a little foretaste, hopefully, of what the kingdom is going to be like, then it makes sense to me that this is the working ethic of marriage, that if you can live out these principles, what I call commitments, that you have a much better chance of experiencing relational success than if you go out on your own. And the very first one is this concept of humility. We have to strip ourselves of ourselves. And I believe that every marital problem ultimately is a pride problem. You think about adultery. What is adultery? Adultery is I deserve to break these rules. I deserve to have something that shouldn't be mine. Think about money problems. Money problems tend to be I want to spend money that I don't have, or I feel like you should work for the money and I should spend the money. Think about communication problems. It tends to be a pride issue. We assume that you should be able to understand me, or I should just be able to understand you without any work or anything like that. Nearly every problem in a marriage comes back to this issue of pride. If we can strip pride from our hearts, marriage will be much simpler.
You know, I still do, even though I don't have a congregation, I still get chosen by a lot of young couples to mentor and then to premarital counsel, and then to wind up presiding over their ceremony. And it's because I'm such a straight shooter that they really, this younger generation wants just the truth. They don't want a workbook. They just want the truth. And part of that truth is that in a dialogue in marriage, from a setting of pride and humility perspective, that there are going to be things said to you which are going to hurt. And the one who is not proud but is humble will acknowledge the pain and say, that hurt, but before I respond to the hurt, I need to examine within myself, why did that hurt? What is it about me that caused that to hurt? It's no different than going to the doctor and the doctor pressing around and saying, does that hurt? He comes to the place that hurts. He always presses it a second time. The first time is to find where it hurts. The second time is to begin to evaluate and assess why it hurts. And it sounds so simple, but it's a very difficult thing to do, but it requires a pause. It requires listening without an agenda, and it requires me taking the time to say, stop. Okay, that hurt, but I don't know why. Imagine in a marital conversation, if you and your wife Jenny were having a conversation, she said something to you that hurt, and you said, honey, that hurt, but I don't want to talk right now. I got to process, because I got to figure out whether it's me, it's something in me that's causing me to hurt by what you say, or is it I can come back to you and tell you my perspective as to why that was hurtful to me. And imagine that you just took the bomb with the lit fuse, and like the cartoons, you waited to the countdown, and then you either took your fingers and you wet them and you took, or you just went over and you pulled the fuse out.
And I think within that, I think what you just laid out, I don't think anybody would doubt. The need and the necessity and good communication and humility to recognize the hurt within yourself, and then to take time to figure out what caused the hurt, and before the conversation exploded into something that it shouldn't be. Everybody understands that. Everybody believes that. But nobody will do that naturally. There is no way that is the first response that somebody's going to do, that just automatically this is how they respond to harsh words, and they're just so docile in everything and so introspective and so humble in their approach. Clearly, that's the way it's supposed to be, but clearly none of us would do that without intention, without a mentor, without study, without understanding, without getting it wrong at times, and forgiving one another and going through a process and thinking, almost deconstructing it and saying, how could we have done that better? And now I wish I would have done this. And so next time I hope I do it this way. Or to get into it and to recognize I've approached this the wrong way. My startup has been so hard and so harsh. I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna ask for a do-over. Sometimes we let our kids do that on occasion. We'll get on to them, and they'll be doing something. Maybe they'll respond in an improper way, and we'll just simply ask, would you like to say that again? How would you like to do this over? If you could start this whole conversation over, how would you like to do that? Sometimes we need to do that with our spouses as well. And yet left to ourselves, without any outside teaching and influence, with the Holy Spirit at work within our lives, we are not going to do that. And that's why I think it shouldn't surprise us that so many marriages fail. Because while we might even know what to do, we don't really know how to do it. And unless we take these intentional steps to read, to study, to learn, to be introspective, to communicate with each other, we're not going to develop these skills of what it takes to truly make a marriage succeed. And the sad reality for many people is they experience those problems in a marriage and they respond as one naturally would respond. And whenever it doesn't go well for them, they just think something is broken about themselves or about the institution. They don't realize, no, this is an opportunity to learn a skill, and you need to figure it out. And there are plenty of resources out there these days to do that. And yet so often we just simply don't do it.
So in these commitments, of which you have 8, which are what you might consider to be the 8 commitments of couples who laugh, love, and last, I remember my grandfather's 50th wedding anniversary. I was a young boy, and they required him to go to the microphone to speak, and he wasn't a speaker, and he didn't like to be in front of a crowd of people. And he got up there, and these are the words he said. He said, 50 years, and it wasn't easy. And he sat down. I had another friend of mine that celebrated their 74th wedding anniversary, and I went to his wife, and I said to her, you know, I've known Tom for 20 years. How did you stay married to him for 74 years? She said, every day from the first morning of our marriage, I got to my knees at the foot of the bed when I woke up. And here's the prayer that I prayed. Lord, today has got to be better than yesterday. She said, and I prayed that prayer every day for 74 years. Your commitment number 1 is happily humble yourself. How do we happily humble ourselves without being marshmallows? How do we humble ourselves without being welcome mats? That's the fear of a man. Okay, so I humble myself. I take this lowly position. I esteem my wife more than myself. I let no unwholesome talk come from my mouth, but only that which is for the encouragement and the uplifting of another. So I just have to humble myself, and I just have to eat, crow, and just take it. That's not what this commitment is.
No, not in any way. And I think for me and for you as people of faith, the only way for us to humble ourselves is to literally get our true understanding of who we are in the sight of God, to recognize His sovereign power, His divine plan, His purposes for us, to feel His tremendous love for us that we don't deserve in any way whatsoever, and yet to recognize that He has placed His image within us, that we do have dignity, we have value. He's given us strengths and understanding. So often I think we confuse humility of what it really looks like. We're rightful to understand that humility is not the arrogance that we so often see in ourselves and see in others, where we demand our rights, demand what we believe that we deserve, all those things. But humility also isn't becoming a doormat. That is failing to understand who we are in the eyes of Jesus. And oftentimes, those who are doormats think as much about themselves as the person who is extremely arrogant. The issue here, basically, of humility, as C.S. Lewis long said, is not thinking more lowly of ourselves as much as it is just thinking of ourselves less, and really beginning to consider, what is God doing in my life? What is God doing in this relationship? How can I serve this person that I love? What are her strengths? What is it that I can assist them in? To think of them more, to think of God more, to think of others more, and really just to think of ourselves less is probably the aspect of humility, not so much this idea of becoming a doormat, because I don't think that's the call of God by any means.
We approach marriage many times in arguments of this person sitting across the table from us is not our loved one, but our enemy. And the hurt is not something we embrace. The hurt is something we react to. And there are very few good reactions to hurt that we have in our quiver of instant responses to hurt. The first one is to hurt back. The second one is to hurt back. The third one is to defend and hurt back. And the fourth one is to defend, hurt back, and leave. And that's kind of the tools, the arsenal that the average person has when they get hurt. But you say to happily, and all of these commitments are happily, joyfully, as if God was giving you the opportunity to be the Joseph, that we don't see him happily embracing his circumstance, but we also don't see him negatively resisting his circumstances. So his happiness can be acceptance, maybe not this exuberance that we're talking about, happy, but acceptance becomes a step towards happiness. And this is actually being intentional to work through the process of arriving at, and I want to make sure people understand that your first book was the what, this is the how, and this is a process to get you to the point of happily humbling yourself and happily embracing your hurt. It's not an expectation that you will immediately, upon reading this book, that you are going to happily dance around and put on a tutu because, hey, my wife just hurt my feelings, and give me an M, give me an O, give me an M, give me a mom. She's the greatest because I'm happy because mom hurt me. It's just not realistic. But it's a process that you're laying out for people to embrace. Before we go to break, I want to, it's kind of a yes or no. I don't normally ask closed answered questions, but I'm going to ask you one. Is it ever too late in the marriage to turn the course and embrace the concepts that are contained in this book?
No.
Good answer. We're talking with Kevin Thompson, author of Happily, 8 Commitments of Couples Who Laugh, Love, and Last. If you've been looking at that 50-year-old married couple that are celebrating their golden anniversary, celebrating their silver anniversary, and wondering what is it about them that you don't have? What is it about their marriage that's lacking in your marriage? Maybe you need a mentor to come alongside of you, and I will tell all of those that have been happily married for 25 years or longer, you have an obligation, a responsibility to take on a younger couple, an up-and-coming couple, and mentor them. That's going to be part of your new ministry, whether or not you serve in ministry within your congregation or not. It is a calling, a clarion call for these younger couples who need mentors to help them along the way, to come alongside them, have dinner with them once a month, and help them walk through some of these circumstances and situations in addition to Kevin Thompson's new book, Happily, so that you can grab a hold of these 8 commitments of couples who laugh, love, and last. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how to avoid apathy and aggression, to see marriage as a bigger than you kind of understanding, to how to make peace and how to endure whatever may come, because none of us is promised a happy future. Jesus even said, if you follow me, there will be tribulation. This is the methodology for how to grow together so that you two together can happily embrace with laughter, with love, and endurance the race that's set before you. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation.
Well, thank you.
Host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Kevin Thompson, author of the book Happily, 8 Commitments of Couples Who Laugh, Love, and Last. Kevin, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Kevin, one of the things that's obvious about your book and your approach to all of this is intentionality. You have to be willing to do that. You know, we keep going back to the 12-step program, and that is to admit I have a problem. You have to be able to assess, is your marriage where you want it to be? Is it bringing mutual joy? Your wife can be happy and you're miserable. You can be happy and your wife's miserable. You get the news that she's having an affair, you actually allude to that, and you're sitting there with somebody and saying to yourself, gee, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner, because you've been such a self-absorbed, what about me kind of person. There's nothing in it for her. She serves you, she does all the things. You hang on the scripture that she's supposed to respect you, she's supposed to serve you, she's supposed to do all these things. And you've got that part of the scripture down pat, but the love is patient, love is kind, love is not easily angered, love is not boastful and proud, love keeps no records of wrong. You've just applied that to somebody else. You've applied that to her, and that's how she's supposed to love you. But you've never gotten the message. That's actually a prescription for how you're supposed to love her. I have in my first Bible, when I first came to faith, 1 Corinthians 13, and I wrote in the margin, if someone doesn't love me this way, they don't love me. And it was bold, and I highlighted it, and I used like 7 different colors, all right? And it became like this really emblazoned, like, because that was the message that I took from it when I first, a new believer, when I first read it. And as I began to mature in my faith, all of a sudden I took a very thin red line and wrote through it. And on top of it, I wrote, if I don't love like this, then I don't love. And my whole paradigm shifted into, hold on a second, this isn't the litmus test for whether or not somebody loves me. This is my command as to how I'm supposed to love. And I don't think we get that. I think we miss that somewhere along the way.
No doubt. And I think 1 Corinthians 13, I think that's a great way to figure out, maybe for a young couple and they're thinking about getting married, that's fine to take that and to ask, does this other person love me in this way before I make this lifelong commitment? But you need to also ask that question, well, am I willing to love them this way for the rest of my life? In a lifelong kind of way. And to me, the word happily within this, I think it can be a misconception we got to be careful about. Happily is never meant to define the moment. It won't always define the day. It won't even characterize some seasons, because in marriage there are some hard seasons. But I think for me the big issue is this: generally speaking, does happily define your marriage? In looking back, that's the thing about these commitments. I mean, we talk about embracing the hurt. Who is going to happily embrace the hurt in the moment? Nobody. I'm not expecting people to. I'm expecting them to obediently embrace the hurt. But then they will look back and be able to look back in a joy-filled kind of way and see the strength of that. And for me, if these 8 commitments begin with this basic concept of humbling yourself, the next natural step is to change the expectations of marriage. And that is, I am not always going to be the spouse my wife deserves. She is not always going to be the spouse I deserve. Marriage itself is not going to be this perfect institution. There are going to be ways in which I'm going to be a bad husband. There are going to be ways in which our marriage is going to be less than what it possibly could be. There are going to be other ways in which we are fallen people that live in a fallen world, and hurt is going to be part of our experience. But we can trust the sovereign plan of God. I always say that we live underneath God's sovereign umbrella, and we live on the foundation of his providential work. And trusting that, we can then lean into the hurt and believe that God is going to use us to now transform our hearts. And as we process through that, then we can look back and happily say that hurt was worth it, because it changed our hearts. It caused us to grow together, closer to God, closer to each other, and then happily becomes a definition in that moment of what we have looked back on our experience. But we have to be honest about something. If a couple cannot honestly say that, generally speaking, we are happily married, something's wrong. This is not the way God designed it to be. He didn't intend it to be you are happy in the individual moment or in the specific day or even in certain seasons. But if in an overarching picture you cannot say that my life is better with this person than what it would have been without this person, then you're simply not doing marriage right. That doesn't mean that you necessarily married the wrong person or that there's a fatal flaw within your relationship that can't be fixed. But what it does mean is, like you were saying, you need to now show intention and make some changes within your relationship to experience what we believe God has designed for you, instead of settling for some second-rate relationship and just assuming that's all you can have.
When couples come to you and they've hit that critical point where they are seeking out the pastor because the marriage has come to some impasse, and you have this conversation with them about, and you kind of handled it the way I did, 3 visits, and then I refer. If I can't get it worked out in three good 1-hour sessions with them, then I'm going to hand them off to the licensed professionals. But a lot of it has to do with approach, style, words. You know, I look at Gary Chapman. He'll be on this program with us this month. Love languages. We don't speak the same language. We don't share anything in common. One's apathetic. One's aggressive. One of the books that Rhonda Stoppe wrote was, "If my husband would just change, then I would be happy," and other myths that wives believe. Mm-hmm. People come into this believing that I'm going to overlook these certain things, but once I get them, I'm going to mold them into the man that they're supposed to be. And this is built on a foundation that's kind of shaky and rocky, and no wonder 15 years later they wind up in your office.
Yeah, they've started with the wrong expectation in that moment, that either marriage is going to be easy or they're going to have the ability to change their spouse and then everything's going to be all right. Generally speaking, by the time people make the phone call to me or they hit my office, they're in a pretty serious problem. They've said before, I've read before, that the average couple waits 6 to 7 years before getting help. That to me in part is a sign of pride, that if we are humble, not only are we already reaching out and getting help before we even have problems, before we even see them, because we know they're going to come. But then beyond that, whenever we run into a roadblock, we're quick to reach out, to at least ask for prayer, to at least go to a mentor couple and say, is this normal in some way? Or to call a pastor or a friend or a counselor and to reach out. But most couples have waited far too long, so that by the time they hit my office, there's basically one question at play. Do you want this to work or not? And a good number of people step into my office and they don't. They are coming there to get permission to break the relationship, to end the relationship. Now, only under extreme circumstances will they get that permission from me, because generally speaking, I want to challenge them in that moment to see that not only can this relationship work, it can be far better than anything they've experienced so far, but the test will be, will they be able to humble themselves and to learn new skills, to take responsibility for what they've gotten wrong, nothing else, not to take on the responsibility of the other person, but to take responsibility for what they've gotten wrong, to learn new skills, to now embrace the hurt of what they're going through and yet not give up, to continue to do the work, to act in this meekness, not to be apathetic toward their relationship or their problems, but not to act in an aggressive way to where they're almost forcing their way by trying to silence their other partner with loud words or demonstrative actions, to see their marriage as something bigger than themselves, that is not just about them, that there's a ripple effect if their relationship were to break apart in some way, to receive from God this mercy that we don't deserve, and mercy received almost always becomes mercy given. And so they strip away this concept of the power struggles and trying to fight to control, thinking that this marriage will be good if I'm in control, and instead to dignify their spouse with their own humanity, with their own strengths, and to recognize that and to give this mercy kind of back and forth, and then to live in the midst of the truth, to be pure in heart, to recognize that it is the truth that's going to set us free. And so we don't have to put on an act, we don't have to project a persona, but instead in humility to embrace what the truth is about me, about each other, and to find a way to go about now to make peace, not just to experience peace, but to do the hard work to make peace. You know, it's always interesting to me, I think we talked about it maybe when I was on your program last July, that it's fascinating to me that how many Nobel Peace Prize winners ended up getting divorced. And so they could navigate, negotiate the dance of international peace, but they can't do it in their own bedrooms. Peace takes work. It makes a great deal of effort. And then as you're doing that, to be able to endure whatever comes your way, to experience in part a persecution of faith as we're trying to live out the way of Jesus. If couples can do that, then they will one day be able to look back even on this tough season, and they can say, and I've had them say it to me before, if the only way we could have the marriage that we have today is having gone through those hardships, we would do it all over again. And it's interesting to me, happy couples look back on the hard times in a happy way. They understand the pain of the moment, but they can look back on it with a fondness of that moment was ultimately for our benefit. And isn't that what heaven's going to be like for us? Aren't we going to look back on the times of this earth and see God at work within our lives, and to look back on it with a fondness, even in the midst of the struggle and the hurt and the pain, but we're going to look back on it to understand how God used that in the exact same way. God uses the pain in our lives today, that one day, if we handle it properly within marriage, a couple will be able to look back on those tough seasons and say, those were some of our best times, because those are the times in which we learned the most about ourselves, and our love truly was bonded together.
Love has become a weapon as opposed to the healing balm that God had intended to be. And the withholding of love, the blame, the recrimination, the going back to the pride factor, going back to the aggression factor. These are pretty common in marriages that seem to have hit critical mass. If I'm a young couple and I grab a hold of this book, will this be something that would be a roadmap for my future to help me figure out how to navigate these landmines, which I probably will at some point in time incur?
Oh, there's no question. And I've always said it's a whole lot easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And I would far rather a couple learn these early on in order to avoid many of the major problems that could come if you allow pride. Pride's like a cancer. And at first it's almost undetectable, but then it slowly begins to present itself, and yet left untreated, it will get to a point where you really almost can't treat it anymore. And so there's no question, if the earlier on somebody can read this, the better off. But I would never want to give the impression that necessarily if somebody's watching that it's too late for them, because the reality is if they start reading it now, it's a whole lot better to get these principles into you now than a year from now or 2 years from now, because those problems will continue to grow. And so for me, if I'm dealing with a young couple, the first thing I want to do is I want to hand them friends, partners, and lovers and say, okay, here are the 3 things you really need to focus on, what you're going to do. Learn what these are. These kind of form the foundation of what marriage is going to be all about. And once you get these 3 concepts, then pick up happily and understand these 8 commitments. This is how you're going to go about to do that. This is the mindset and the attitude that you're going to have. And it's not something that you read one time and set down and then you're forever done with it. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount is something we have to continually come back to. And I think what's interesting to me is both of these books. If you read them in one season of life and then take 5 years and then read them in another season of life, those concepts will take on different meanings because the angle in which you're coming at them will be somewhat different. And so what it means to be a friend whenever you've been married for 40 years is different than what it means to be a friend when you've been married for 4 months. And specifically in the book Happily, these 8 commitments, who doesn't need to read on a regular basis about the need to strip pride from their lives? Who doesn't need to be reminded that life is full of pain and we need to find a way to embrace it so that God can use it? Who doesn't need to be reminded in some way that we are at times apathetic and we are at times aggressive, not just in personality, but both those things are at work, and we need to find a meek way to operate. The old preacher illustration of meekness is power under control. Remember, it's like the horse with a jockey, right? To use our strength to the best benefits of our spouse. Who doesn't need to be reminded that marriage is bigger than us? And the longer you're married, the older you get, the bigger it is with the community that you've surrounded yourself with, the people that you impact, the influences that you now have. Who doesn't need to be reminded of the need to receive mercy and to give it back, to be pure in heart, to speak the truth, to work out peace, and to endure hardship? And so this is a book for every generation. I don't doubt that at all. But the earlier you can learn it, the better off you're going to be.
Have we gotten into a society where we look like we're either making it or faking it, or there's a counterfeit out there that appears to be peace, that we put on this face, this mask, this Academy Award-winning performance? How do we combat that, and how do we then reset and get real? Because if we get real at home, we're going to get real in the community, and it might not look the same anymore.
Oh, I absolutely think that. I mean, just yesterday here at my church, we were preaching through the end of James chapter 5, and I think he's talking about the key to genuine community. He's calling the church to true community, and he says within that to pray for both those who are suffering and those who are sick, but also those who are celebrating. But then he says, confess your sins one to another. And I think that the greatest problem that we have in part of relationships today, not marriage specifically, is we are faking them. We are interacting at a very surface level kind of concept, afraid that if somebody finds out who we truly are, they're not going to love us. And so we just project this persona and hope they'll fall in love with that. But that's not true community. That's not true relationships. And the problem is that mindset follows into and flows into the marriage relationship, where many people are failing to embrace the truth of who they are, of their own failings, of their own struggles, which does lead to this pseudo community. I think there's a lot of marriages that are fake, that it is the persona they are projecting and not a true relationship. But you think about it, it all goes back to the very first commitment. If you embrace humility, then suddenly you can begin to reveal your hurts and your struggles. If you embrace the hurt, then it's not going to be a surprise to you when things don't go your way. But if you're doing it within the concept of mercy, where that's given back and forth with a purity of heart, then suddenly you can begin to establish a real relationship, a real community. And in my opinion, both in the church and the home, those are the places in which we begin to test out, to pull back and reveal who our true hearts actually are, and to truly open ourselves up to real connection. And as we learn to do it in the home and in the church, then we can begin to create real connections with people outside of the home and the church.
You make so many good points. We've got a couple minutes left in this segment. I want you to talk to the couples that right now are on the brink of thinking about it's too late. And there's just been so many things that have compounded where the piles on both sides of the house are so high. What would you say to them?
Yeah, and it's possible. It's possible that the relationship isn't going to make it. We live in a broken world, and sometimes it just doesn't work. My challenge to them would simply be this. Make sure that you can look yourself in the mirror and say that you have done everything in your power to make this relationship work. That there's never going to be a shadow of doubt in your mind that you might have given up early or something like this. And so, have you reached out to a professional? Have you sought counseling? If your spouse refuses it, go by yourself. Begin to work on yourself. Go to your spouse and tell them why you fell in love in the first place. What was it that attracted you to the person? What is it that you long for? Remember the success. And begin to paint a future of what marriage could be like. Yes, we're in a tough spot. Yes, things are difficult now. But think about what could be. At some point, you probably experienced at least a shadow of that. And remind the person why you fell in love with them to begin with, and ask them to make a serious attempt, not just to make this work, but to make this relationship thrive. And then get in and do the work. 6 months, a year, do the work to make this marriage work, to see, is this something that we can make happen? And if at the end of that process you're still in the same spot and you really can't, then okay, then maybe the relationship is going to end. But generally speaking, if two individuals are willing to do the work over an extended period of time, the transformation that they can see is amazing. And they can not just have a marriage that lasts, that makes it, they can have a marriage that they've never experienced before.
Heard directly from the author of Happily, 8 Commitments of Couples Who Laugh, Love, and Last by Kevin Thompson. Another very insightful build-up on his last book of Friends, Partners, and Lovers, which was the what to. Now he gives you the how to. Bring back the spark, bring back the happiness that those of you that joke and say, well, we've been married happily married for 35 years, but we've been married for 55. To be able to say we've been happily married for 55 and to reassess the whole marriage into a brand new context, because you become intentional about who you are in the marriage and taking those expectations off the other person and looking at yourself and realizing that if there's going to be change, it needs to begin with you. Kevin Thompson, thank you so much for sharing with us again. Great insights into marriage, great insights into a new book called Happily, 8 Commitments of Couples Who Laugh, Love, and Last. Thanks again, my friend, for being with us.
Thanks so much. I had a great time.
Great to see you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.